If you break your arm, an X-ray shows exactly what is wrong. It's this jagged white line on a black background, and the doctor can just point to it and say, there is the problem.
Right, it's very straightforward.
Exactly. But imagine a condition where your brain's electrical grid is violently hijacked, just causing debilitating seizures, and traditional brain scans show absolutely nothing. Because, well, the culprit isn't actually originating in your brain at all. It's in your ovaries.
Yeah, and that completely shatters our standard expectations of localized medicine. We are so used to looking for the problem right at the site of the symptom.
Right.
But when you step into this world of neurology, intersecting with female endocrinology, you realize that the brain is essentially sitting downstream from this massive hormonal dam. And, when those floodgates open or close, the electrical consequences in the brain are just profound.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We're taking you on a mission to uncover the hidden, really powerful ways that perimenopausal estrogen fluctuations fundamentally alter brain excitability. Specifically, we are looking at a phenomenon called catamenial epilepsy.
Yes, and it's a vital topic.
It really is. And even if you don't have epilepsy, understanding how these invisible hormonal tides can rewrite your brain's electrical thresholds and, completely change how your liver metabolizes drugs is just an absolute masterclass in how interconnected the human body truly is.
It really is. And to map this out for you, we're pulling together a pretty fascinating cross-section of modern medicine today.
Yeah, we've got a great stack of sources.
We do. We're looking at current clinical guidelines on menopause, some deeply personal patient anecdotes from neurology clinics, pharmacology papers on repurposed drugs, specifically an old diuretic called acetazolamide, and some highly complex structural biology involving liver receptors.
But to really grasp the sheer chaos of the perimenopausal transition, we first need to establish what the baseline actually looks like, because you can't really appreciate how destructive a hurricane is until you understand, normal weather patterns.
Okay, let's unpack this baseline condition. Catamenial epilepsy is essentially a seizure disorder where the electrical storms in the brain cluster around specific phases of the menstrual cycle, right?
That is the core of it, yes. And it's vital to understand that this isn't some rare, fringe edge case.
Wait, really? How common is it?
Up to 70% of women with seizure disorders experience catamenial patterns.
Wow, 70%.
Exactly. It's a massive driver of disease burden that often flies entirely under the radar. And the entire mechanism is driven by the push and pull of two main ovarian hormones. That's estrogen and progesterone.
Okay, let me try to visualize this. If we think of the brain's baseline electrical excitability, like, say, the engine of a car, estrogen is pressing down on the gas pedal, and progesterone is actively hitting the brakes. That is a highly accurate way to model it, actually. Let's look at the engine's mechanics. Estrogen is fundamentally pro-convulsant.
Meaning it causes seizures.
Right. It actually changes the physical architecture of the brain by increasing the density of dendritic spines.
And those are
They're the tiny branch-like connections between neurons. So by building more of these connections, estrogen is literally building more physical roads for electrical signals to travel on. It also actively boosts the excitatory glutamate network. It's basically flooding the engine with fuel.
While progesterone is trying to keep the car from speeding out of control. But from what I understand from the sources, progesterone doesn't do this all by itself, does it?
No, it acts more like a raw material. The liver and the brain take that circulating progesterone and convert it into a highly potent neurosteroid called allopregnanolone.
Okay, allopregnanolone.
Yeah, and this neurosteroid is the actual brake fluid. It binds directly to GABA A receptors in the brain. GABA is the primary inhibitory system in your central nervous system. So when allopregnanolone binds to these receptors, it hyperpolarizes the neurons.
Hold on, let's break down hyperpolarizes for a second. If I remember my high school biology, neurons fire by exchanging positive and negative ions, right?
You've got it. Hypopolarizing a neuron means you're increasing the negative electrical charge inside that specific cell.
Oh, I see.
Think of it like widening the gap that a spark plug has to jump. By making the inside of the cell more negative, it becomes mathematically much harder for an excitatory electrical spark to trigger a misfire. The neuron becomes highly resistant to having a seizure.
So throughout a standard menstrual cycle, the gas and the brakes are constantly shifting, creating these distinct windows of vulnerability. The clinical data breaks us down into three distinct patterns, C1, C2, and C3.
Right, the C1 pattern is the most frequently observed. This occurs just before and during menstruation.
So right around the period.
Exactly. At this point in the cycle, protective progesterone drops off a cliff, Without progesterone, there's no allopregnanolone. The brake fluid basically drains out and seizures cluster.
Got it. And C2.
The C2 pattern occurs earlier, right around ovulation. This is the moment when estrogen spikes dramatically to trigger the release of an egg, but progesterone hasn't risen yet to balance it out.
Ah, so the gas pedal gets slammed to the floor.
Exactly. And that leaves the C3 pattern.
I assume this happens when the cycle itself is somehow broken.
Precisely. C3 occurs in anovulatory cycles, meaning an egg is never released at all. Because ovulation doesn't happen, the second half of the cycle, the luteal phase, is severely compromised.
So there's no progesterone spike.
Right. Protective neurosteroids remain chronically low the entire month. The brakes are basically worn down to the metal, leaving the brain in a constant state of mild vulnerability.
Okay, so if this delicate, complex tug of war is what happens during a standard predictable cycle, what happens when a woman enters perimenopause and just throws a giant wrench into the engine?
We get the perfect storm. Perimenopause is the transitional window, sometimes lasting up to a decade, actually leading into full menopause. The common misconception is that perimenopause is this gentle, linear fading away of hormones.
Right, like they just slowly wind down.
But it is not. It's characterized by erratic, highly unpredictable, and violently swinging hormone levels. Estrogen levels can spike to levels far higher than in a normal cycle, completely unopposed by progesterone.
Wait, I need to challenge this because it feels kind of counterintuitive. If menopause ultimately means your hormone levels drop down to a flat zero, shouldn't perimenopause actually be a relief? Like if the hormones are shutting down, shouldn't the seizures decrease as you get closer to the finish line? Why does it get so much worse before it gets better?
What's fascinating here is that it all comes down to a phenomenon called neurosteroid withdrawal.
Withdrawal, like with drugs.
Similar mechanism, yeah. The danger isn't just about the absolute level of the hormone, it is about the velocity of the drop. In that premenstrual C1 pattern we discussed, as a perimenopausal woman approaches her erratic period, her allopregnanolone levels can crash by over 70% in just 48 hours.
A 70% crash in 2 days. The brain has no time to adapt to that.
It physically cannot adapt fast enough. The sudden, massive absence of allopregnanolone triggers an actual structural crisis in the brain. The GABA A receptors, the actual brake pads we talked about, are stripped of specific protective components called delta subunits.
Oh, wow. So the receptor physically changes.
Yes. The physical brake pads temporarily dissolve, so even if you pump the brakes, there's nothing there to grip the wheel. The brain is left entirely exposed to an electrical storm.
And reading through the patient anecdotes from the neurology clinics, you realize the human toll of this physiological crisis is just devastating. These aren't just beta points. There's the detailed case of a 50-year-old woman who suddenly started having massive, debilitating seizures.
Yes, I recall that one.
Yeah, and she was initially misdiagnosed with something called migrelepsy, the assumption being that migraines were triggering her epilepsy. Her doctors entirely missed that her mid-cycle hormonal spikes were the actual trigger, just because they weren't looking at her ovaries. They were only looking at her head.
That tunnel vision in diagnostics is incredibly common, unfortunately. Because perimenopause isn't universally tracked as a primary neurological trigger, the root cause is left to just run rampant.
There's another really harrowing case file from a menopause specialist regarding a 44-year-old patient. She had been managing her focal seizures perfectly fine for decades. And just to clarify for you listening, a focal seizure isn't a massive full-body convulsion. It's a localized electrical misfire, isolated to one specific neighborhood of the brain.
Right, it's very contained.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when this woman hit perimenopause, her hormones started oscillating wildly. She developed severe insomnia, and those manageable focal seizures absolutely skyrocketed in frequency. I mean, her daily life was completely upended.
Her situation really highlights a critical failing in traditional pharmacology. Standard daily anti-seizure medications are designed to provide a steady, continuous suppression of brain activity. They are not designed to dynamically respond to a 50-year-old woman losing 70% of her neurosteroids over a weekend.
It's just the wrong tool for the job.
Exactly. And this systemic failure has forced neurologists to look for backdoor solutions, which brings us to a surprisingly old drug-making waves in targeted therapy. Acetazolamide.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the chemistry is just wild. Acetazolamide is a carbonic anhydrase inhibitor, an old diuretic, right? is sometimes used for altitude sickness.
Yes, exactly.
So how on earth does a drug that alters cellular pH levels manage to stop a seizure triggered by a missing ovarian hormone?
It's a brilliantly elegant physiological workaround. When progesterone plummets and those GABA-A brake pads lose their delta subunits, the neuron becomes hyperexcitable. Acetazolamide steps into this chaotic environment and inhibits a specific enzyme, which ends up lowering the levels of intracellular bicarbonate.
Okay, lowering bicarbonate means you're removing the alkaline components, so the inside of the neuron is becoming slightly more acidic.
Yes, it creates a highly localized, slightly acidic microenvironment inside the neuron itself. And this is the magic of that pH shift. Altering the acidity physically changes how the remaining pieces of the GABA-I receptor behave.
Wait, it changes the shape of the broken receptor?
Effectively, yes. The acidic environment artificially forces the broken receptor to clamp down and function as if the allopregnanolone was still there. It manually engages the brakes, completely bypassing the missing hormone.
That is fascinating. You're fixing a structural hormone deficit with a targeted acid-base chemical trick, and the clinical results are staggering. Over 60% of patients with the C1 perimenstrual pattern see their seizures cut by at least half when they take short, targeted doses of acetazolamide.
The beauty of it is the intermittent application. You don't have to flood the patient's system with heavy-duty anti-seizure medications every single day.
Which usually come with terrible side effects, right?
Oh, severe cognitive side effects. Brain fog, lethargy, you name it. But with this, you simply deploy the acetazolamide when the hormonal weather forecast predicts a storm.
But fixing the brain's electrical grid is only treating half the patient. To treat the root cause of perimenopause itself, the hot flashes, the mood swings, the absolute chaos, doctors usually prescribe hormone replacement therapy or HRT. But the moment you try to combine HRT with anti-seizure medication, you trigger a massive biochemical turf war in the liver.
You do. Now, the clinical guidelines are very clear about what should be used for these patients. It's transdermal estrogen, like a patch or a gel, combined with body-identical progesterone. This combination avoids a lot of the clotting risks associated with older synthetic oral hormones.
Right.
But as you mentioned, the dilemma is the brutal reality of drug interactions.
Let's visualize the liver for a second. It's essentially the bouncer at the club of your bloodstream.
Yeah.
Its job is to check IDs and throw out toxins. And it seems like some of these anti-seizure medications are bribing the bouncer to kick the HRT out before the hormones can even do their job.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the bouncer analogy is structurally perfect when you look at the medicinal chemistry. At the center of this turf war is a highly sensitive protein in the liver called the pregnane X receptor, or PXR. Think of PXR as the head of security.
So PXR is the master sensor looking for trouble.
Exactly. PXR's entire evolutionary purpose is to detect foreign, potentially dangerous substances, environmental toxins, strange plant alkaloids, or synthetic drugs. When a patient takes certain older anti-seizure medications, the PXR sensor detects them, hits the panic button, and radically upregulates the body's clearance system. Specifically, it floods the liver with an enzyme called CYP3A4.
Okay, and CYP3A4 is our overzealous bouncer throwing everything out the back door.
Precisely, and the tragedy here is that CYP3A4 is incredibly aggressively efficient at metabolizing and flushing out hormonal treatments. A woman can be meticulously taking her prescribed HRT patches or her oral contraceptives. But because her daily anti-seizure medication is constantly keeping the PXR panic button pressed down, the liver furiously clears those hormones from her blood before they ever reach her brain or her ovaries.
So the HRT is just rendered totally useless.
Completely useless, leaving her trapped in perimenopausal hell. And the risk of unwanted pregnancy skyrockets because her birth control fails entirely.
Which puts the patient in an impossible double bind. You have to choose between protecting your brain from seizures or protecting your body from perimenopause. But the structural biology research points to a completely new scientific horizon, doesn't it? Pharmacologists aren't just accepting this interaction anymore. They're using computational 3D modeling to actively design out the PXR trigger.
Yes, and this is the absolute cutting edge of rational drug design. Scientists are looking at the intricate 3D molecular folding of the PXR protein pocket. They map the exact shape of the keyhole. Then they take the molecular scaffolding of a highly effective anti-seizure drug and intentionally tweak its physical shape. They add a bulky chemical ring here or shift a carbon atom there.
So they're intentionally designing a drug that physically bumps against the edges of the PXR pocket and just gets rejected.
Exactly. They ensure the key no longer fits the lock. If the anti-seizure molecule cannot bind to the PXR sensor, the panic button is never pressed. The CYP3A4 bouncer is never called in, and the liver happily leaves the HRT and the contraceptives alone to do their job.
That is a total game changer for quality of life.
Yeah.
It allows these intersecting treatments to just coexist peacefully. But this turf war in the liver isn't just a threat to hormone therapy. It has a profound physical ripple effect on the skeletal system, which really forces us to zoom out and look at the whole body.
You really cannot isolate neurology from endocrinology, and you certainly cannot isolate endocrinology from orthopedics. Women with catamenial epilepsy navigating perimenopause face a terrifying double whammy regarding osteoporosis and fracture risk.
Because the bones are literally caught in the crossfire of this liver metabolism issue. Let's trace the causality here. First, you have the natural onset of menopause, which brings a massive systemic loss of estrogen. And estrogen is crucial for telling the bones to maintain their density, right?
Yes, estrogen suppresses the cells that break down bone tissue, so its natural decline inherently weakens the skeletal structure. But then you add in the collateral damage from the anti-seizure medications. Remember that CYP3A4 enzyme, the overzealous bouncer?
The one flushing out the HRT, yes.
Well, that exact same enzyme is also responsible for metabolizing vitamin D. Because the anti-seizure medication has pushed CYP3A4 into hyperdrive, the liver aggressively chews up and destroys the body's circulating vitamin D reserves before they can even be utilized.
Oh, man. And without vitamin D, your intestines physically cannot absorb calcium from your food. So you have a patient whose bones are degrading because she's losing estrogen, and she has zero medication is annihilating her vitamin D.
It creates an accelerated, severe drop in bone mineral density. And this leads to a drastically higher risk of life-altering fractures in women who are only in their late 40s or 50s.
So we have the electrical grid of the brain, the biochemical sorting facility of the liver, and the structural integrity of the bones all intrinsically linked. Is pharmacology the only lever we can pull here? Does changing a patient's lifestyle actually move the needle when the chemical imbalances are this severe?
Lifestyle is not just a secondary suggestion. It is a critical, foundational pillar of treatment. Because managing perimenopause isn't just about replacing the direct chemical effect of the hormones, it's about mitigating the secondary physiological trauma. Hormonal hot flashes and severe night sweats cause profound sleep deprivation and nocturnal anxiety.
And sleep deprivation is arguably the single most universal seizure trigger across all forms of epilepsy.
It destroys the brain's resilience. By aggressively treating the menopausal insomnia, even through entirely non-pharmacological routes like strict sleep hygiene protocols or cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, you give the brain time to clear metabolic waste and reinforce its networks.
So by treating the sleep, you're treating the epilepsy.
Exactly. By improving the sleep architecture, you indirectly but significantly raise the seizure threshold.
It is incredibly empowering to know that behavioral changes can reinforce the medical interventions like that. And as chaotic and overwhelming as this perimenopausal storm sounds, there is a physiological light at the end of the tunnel. Once a woman successfully navigates this transition and reaches full menopause, which is clinically defined as a full year without a single period, the entire landscape shifts.
It does. Once the ovaries fully retire, estrogen and progesterone levels drop to a permanent, stable baseline. The violent, erratic roller coaster finally pulls into the station.
That must be a huge relief.
For many women, particularly those suffering from the C1 and C2 catamenial patterns we discussed, their neurological networks stabilize. Without the massive spikes and crashes of neurosteroids triggering withdrawal, many women experience a dramatic natural reduction in their seizure frequency post-menopause.
We have covered a tremendous amount of ground today. We've mapped out how the accelerator of estrogen and the brake fluid of progesterone dictate the brain's excitability. We explored how the perimenopausal transition throws that delicate sister into chaos through severe neural steroid withdrawal.
A very complex cascade.
Yeah. And we saw how brilliant pharmacological workarounds like the intracellular pH shifts from acetazolamide can manually engage the brakes. And of course, we untangled the complex molecular turf war in the liver, where scientists are designing 3D drug molecules to bypass the PXR sensor, allowing HRT and anti-seizure meds to finally coexist without destroying the skeletal system in the process.
It is a profound testament to the interconnected machinery of human biology.
So what does this all mean?
Well, to wrap up, there is one final, almost science fiction concept emerging from this data that challenges everything we thought we knew about the aging brain.
Oh, I like the sound of that. Let's hear it.
It builds directly on a mechanism we established early on. We know that estrogen actively increases dendritic spine density. It physically builds the excitatory neural pathways, the roads that the seizures travel on.
Like the gas pedal building the infrastructure.
So when a woman passes through perimenopause and into full menopause, and her estrogen levels permanently drop down to that flat baseline, could the brain's physical architecture actually undergo a natural massive pruning process?
Pruning, like cutting back the branches.
Exactly. Without the estrogen constantly stimulating their growth, do those excess seizure-prone excitatory pathways literally wither away from lack of use?
Wow. Which would perfectly explain why the seizures often dramatically decrease after menopause. But wait, if we can scientifically prove that this postmenopausal hormonal pruning physically dismantles the epileptic networks, could future neurologists find a way to artificially stimulate this exact pruning process in much younger brains?
That is the frontier. Could we permanently erase epileptic networks by mimicking this localized menopausal pruning mechanism, tricking the brain into dismantling its own faulty wiring without actually having to alter a younger patient's systemic hormones at all?
That's incredible.
We are no longer just looking at suppressing a symptom. We are looking at whether the brain can be coaxed into physically remodeling itself by taking cues from the body's own natural aging process.
It brings us right back to that simple X-ray machine we talked about at the very beginning. You cannot see any of this on a standard scan. You can't just point a finger at a broken bone. But beneath the surface, there is a roaring, deeply interconnected biochemical symphony happening in your body every single day. The ovarian hormones, the liver clearance enzymes, the intracellular acidity, the density of your bones, they are all engaged in a constant dynamic conversation. We really encourage you to look at the everyday physiological fluctuations in your own body with a newfound awe. It isn't just a monthly cycle, it is a masterclass in biological engineering. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us.